Deuteronomy 31 verses 24 to 26 explains that when Moses had made an end of writing the word of this law in a book, Moses commanded the Levites, saying, "Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant, that it may be there for a witness against thee." So there were two laws, one written by the finger of God on stone and placed inside the ark of the covenant. Another law written by Moses, by man, on a type of parchment, skin or paper, rolled up and put outside the ark of the covenant in some sort of pocket. Right? That was called a ceremonial law. And those laws governed certain things about eating, certain things about festivals, what they called Sabbath days, and various other items which were strict instructions in those days. Now, above the Ark of the Covenant, you had the two angels. Now, those two angels are called covering cherubs. And these two angels actually represent the two angels in heaven that cover the throne of God in heaven. I always wonder at the idea of Lucifer or Satan being called the covering cherub, because he was one of the two angels that covered the light of God in heaven, what's known as the Shekinah glory. You see, you got the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, which was made of solid gold, which is above the 10 Commandments, and then covering that were the two covering cherubs, and in between is what's known as the Shekinah glory. Now, in the original writings, the word for the Shekinah glory is a word for light. There is no light source. It's just light. And that is the very presence of God. And in the Holy of Holies would be the Shekinah glory. And were the high priest to enter into the Holy of Holies without having his sins cleansed before that, he would immediately perish through the brightness of the presence of God. Now, those were all items within the sanctuary, and every single one had a representation or a meaning. Let's put this into context. That's all in the Old Testament. How does that refer to the New Testament? Well, like I showed you, the single entrance into the sanctuary or the tabernacle of God pointed towards Jesus Christ being the one way which we can attain salvation. John 14 verse 6 said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." Not by Allah, not by Buddha, not by anybody else, but by me. Right? What about the ashes? Well, the ashes in the Old Testament sanctuary points towards Jesus' judgment on the wicked in the end of time. What about the lamb, the burnt offering, the sacrifice of the lamb? Well, the sacrifice of the lamb in the Old Testament points towards Jesus' death on our behalf in the New Testament. What about the high priest in the Old Testament sanctuary? Well, the high priest represents Jesus himself. The brazen altar of burnt offering represents Jesus becoming the Passover lamb. What about the laver for washing in front of the sanctuary tent? The laver for washing represents baptism into Jesus Christ. Let's go to the holy place first. The holy place actually foretold the Christian life, which is a life centered around Jesus Christ. Focus on Jesus Christ. There was no Christ-centered focus of life in the Old Testament because Christ hadn't come yet. But in the New Testament, exactly the same as in the Old Testament, each item foretold of absorbing the bread, being involved in taking out the light of Jesus Christ, and prayer through to the Shekinah glory in heaven through the power of Jesus Christ. And then in the most holy place. Well, the holy place actually shows in the Old Testament the power and the magnitude and the truthfulness of Jesus in the throne room of God. It's incredible to see that the Old Testament sanctuary, as was displayed in Moses' time and throughout history, is exactly the same as the gospel we have today. I mean, that in itself is just mind-boggling. The Old Testament sanctuary represents the New Testament gospel. And the same gospel that we have in the Old Testament is the same gospel as we have in the New Testament. Except that one or two things have changed. We no longer have to kill a lamb for our sacrifice because Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover lamb. So, question. If the Old Testament gospel is exactly the same as the New Testament gospel, what changed when Jesus came? What changed? Something must have changed. Well, remember outside of the Ark of the Covenant there was another law which was written by man, called the ceremonial law. Well, that law fell away. Deuteronomy 31:24-26 speaks of Moses writing that law. The Lord told Moses, take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. This is when Moses had to write down these statutes and these laws, not put them inside the ark with the Ten Commandments, but put them outside the ark. And this all came to an end in Colossians 2:14-17. It explains that Jesus' crucifixion was blotting out the handwriting of the ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of a holy day, or of a new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come. But the body is of Christ. So this is the most well-known text used to explain that you are no longer under the law, that the law has been abolished because it's been nailed to the cross. But the question needs to be asked, which law was referred to in Colossians 2? Which law referred to meat? Was there any law in the moral law that referred to meat, or to drink, or to a holy day? Well, there is. Except that it didn't mention new moons or Sabbath days. You see, Sabbath days with a small s is, if you look in the New King James Version, it's not Sabbath day with a capital S, it's Sabbath days with a small s. Those are all the festivals and then the wheat sheaf and the Passover, etc., etc. Those were called Sabbath days. Now, which law referred to a meat, drink, holy day, new moon, Sabbath days, etc.? Well, it was the ceremonial law. Question 2, Colossians tells us that these are a shadow of things to come. So, question 2. Where does the shadow stop? Imagine you standing in your garden, the sun is busy going down, and you have a long shadow behind you. The shadow starts at your head on the other distance over there, and it comes and comes and comes. Where does the shadow stop? Boom, there where you are, right? So these Sabbath laws, these new moon festivals, these various meat laws inside the ceremonial law were a shadow of whom nailed it to the cross? Jesus Christ. See, they stopped at the cross. And that's why when you look at the Jewish feasts in type and antitype, you can see that one Jewish year actually represents the entire Christian era. Let me explain this. Every Jewish year you would have various feasts. You would have the Passover feast, which would be on Nisan 14. And the Passover field was the type in the Old Testament of the antitype in the New Testament. The Passover on Nisan 14 was fulfilled in the crucifixion. Now we know that happened on Friday. There's some contention about that, but we'll get into that now. Let's look at Exodus 12 verse 3 onwards all the way to 47. I'm just going to take excerpts from it. In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them a lamb without blemish, a male of the first year, and ye shall keep it up to the 14th day of the same month. So, regarding the Passover lamb, on the 10th day, Nisan 14, Nisan 10, you would take a lamb without blemish, a male, and you would keep it in your home, in your household, for 4 days. And you shall keep it unto the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the 2 side posts and on the upper doorposts of the houses wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. It is the Lord's Passover. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh. You're not allowed to take any flesh abroad out of the house. Neither shall ye break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. Does this sound familiar? We've just been through the prophecies about no